For centuries, the armor known as Escharon's Protector had been a source of wonder and terror across the galaxy. Forged by a forgotten civilization, its origins were as enigmatic as its purpose. It was said to possess a mind of its own, capable of rejecting any being who dared to claim it. Alien species from the farthest reaches of space, proud, powerful, and cunning, had sought it out only to be cast aside. Some were merely repelled, thrown across the chamber with a force that shattered bones and egos alike. Others, less fortunate, were destroyed outright. The armor did not discriminate in its rejection, save for one chilling consistency. It found them all unworthy. The legend surrounding Escharon's Protector spoke of a single condition for its acceptance, a heart both unyielding and untainted. But what that truly meant had eluded every seeker. In their arrogance, warlords, scholars, and warriors had all assumed themselves worthy, and all had been proven wrong. Over time, the armor became a fable, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. Still, for those desperate enough or bold enough, it remained a beacon, a relic of unmatched power, waiting for the right hands to wield it. Captain Adrian Kane had heard the stories like everyone else, but he wasn't one to be swayed by myth. His life had been shaped by realities far harsher than any legend. Orphaned as a boy during a brutal alien incursion, Kane had clawed his way up through the ranks of humanity's fractured military forces. He had become a man of strategy, precision, and an unwavering will to protect his own. But he had also become a man haunted by the knowledge that humanity was outnumbered and outgunned in an increasingly hostile galaxy. When Kane first heard rumors that the armor might still exist, buried deep within the ruins of a long-dead planet, he dismissed them. Humanity couldn't afford to chase after fairy tales. But the whispers grew louder, more credible. A rogue trader claimed to have seen the chamber where the armor rested, untouched and waiting. A retired mercenary swore he had witnessed its power firsthand before being cast out. The details were inconsistent, but the possibility was undeniable. For Kane, it wasn't about greed or glory. It was about survival. If the armor was real, and if it could be claimed, it might be the edge humanity so desperately needed. His crew didn't understand his obsession, but they trusted him. Kane was a man who inspired loyalty, not through charm or bravado, but through sheer competence. When he made the decision to pursue the armor, they followed without question, even as doubts lingered in their minds. The journey to the planet known as Velisur was fraught with danger. Alien patrols guarded the region, and the planet itself was said to be cursed, its surface riddled with traps left behind by its mysterious creators. But Kane was undeterred. He had faced worse odds before. The ruins of Velisur were as haunting as the stories had described, vast, crumbling structures that loomed against a blood-red sky. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, as if the planet itself held its breath. Kane and his team navigated the labyrinthine corridors with a mix of caution and urgency, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Ancient glyphs adorned the walls, their meanings long forgotten, yet they seemed to watch the intruders with silent judgment. As they ventured deeper, Kane felt an inexplicable pull, as if something unseen was guiding him. The others felt it too, though none dared to speak of it. Finally, they reached a massive chamber, its entrance framed by towering pillars carved with intricate patterns. At its center, resting on a raised platform, was the armor. It was more beautiful and terrifying than any of them had imagined, a seamless blend of elegance and menace. Its dark surface seemed to shimmer with an inner light, as though it was alive. The air grew heavy as they approached, and a deep hum filled the chamber, resonating in their bones. One by one, the others hesitated, fear overcoming their curiosity. Only Kane continued forward, his gaze locked on the armor. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a connection, a recognition. The stories had always described the armor as cold and unyielding, yet in this moment, Kane felt as though it was watching him, testing him. He reached the platform and stood before the armor, his reflection distorted in its polished surface. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with something deeper, an understanding that this moment could change everything. Slowly, he extended his hand, expecting the rejection that had met every other seeker. Instead, the hum grew louder, and a voice, not a sound but a presence, entered his mind. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a flood of emotions and images, a conversation beyond language. The armor wasn't asking who he was. It was asking why he had come. Cain closed his eyes, his memories flashing before him. The screams of his parents, the destruction of his home, the countless battles he had fought since then. Not for revenge, but to ensure no other child would endure what he had. He opened his eyes, his resolve unshaken. The armor remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, with a sudden brilliance, it began to shift, its pieces unfurling like a metallic flower. Cain stepped forward, and the armor moved to meet him, encasing him in a seamless embrace. It wasn't cold or suffocating as he had feared. It was warm, alive, a perfect union of man and machine. The chamber trembled as the armor fully bonded with Cain, its ancient systems awakening after centuries of dormancy. The others watched in stunned silence as their captain stood before them, transformed. The armor's voice spoke then, not in his mind, but aloud, resonating through the chamber. Worthy, for the first time in its long history, Escharon's protector had chosen. The journey to Valisar had tested Captain Adrian Cain's resolve, but nothing could have prepared him for what lay ahead. As the ancient armor bonded to his body, the sensation was unlike anything he had experienced before, an intimate fusion of thought and matter. The weight he had expected never came. Instead, the armor moved as though it were part of him, responding not to his commands but to his intentions. Yet, even as it accepted him physically, he could feel its presence probing deeper. This was no simple tool. It was alive, and it was not yet done judging him. The chamber darkened. The faint glow of the armor, now the only source of light. A low vibration filled the air, intensifying until Cain realized it wasn't external. It was inside his mind. The armor spoke, not with words but with waves of emotion and memory, drawing him into a world that wasn't the ruins of Valisar. Cain blinked and found himself standing in a battlefield, one he recognized all too well. It was the colony world of Siren IV, the site of one of humanity's greatest defeats. Alien warships had rained fire upon the surface, leaving nothing but ash and ruin in their wake. He could hear the screams again, the chaos of evacuation ships failing to launch, the cries of families torn apart. His own voice cut through the cacophony as he barked orders to his men, trying to salvage what little they could. But something was wrong. This wasn't just a memory. It was alive, visceral. Cain looked down at his hands and saw the blood, felt the heat of the fires. This was no illusion. The armor was forcing him to relive it. "Why are you showing me this?" Cain demanded, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions surging through him. The reply came not in words but in a surge of feelings, doubt, guilt, anger. The armor wasn't simply testing his actions. It was questioning his motives. Why had he fought? Was it duty? Vengeance? Or something deeper? Something he hadn't fully admitted to himself? The scene shifted. Cain was no longer on Siren IV, but aboard his first command, the frigate Resolute. He stood on the bridge, surrounded by his crew. They looked to him for guidance, their eyes filled with a trust he wasn't sure he deserved. This memory was different, quieter, but no less painful. He remembered the decision he had made that day, the order to retreat, leaving behind a civilian convoy to buy time for his ship to escape. It had been the only tactical option, but the weight of that choice had never left him. "Do you regret it?" The voice came suddenly, clear and sharp, cutting through the haze of the memory. Cain turned, searching for the source. It was the armor, speaking directly to him now, its tone neither condemning nor forgiving. "I regret the cost," Cain replied after a moment, his voice firm. "But I don't regret the choice. I saved my crew, and because of them, We've saved others since." The silence that followed was oppressive. Kane felt the armor digging deeper, searching for cracks in his resolve. It wasn't looking for perfection. He realized that now. It was searching for something else entirely, something harder to define. The memory dissolved, and Kane found himself back in the ruins of Valisur, or at least a version of it. The chamber stretched endlessly, the walls adorned with shifting symbols he couldn't decipher. In front of him stood figures, shadows of the past, perhaps, or echoes of those who had come before him. They wore the armor as he did, their features obscured but their presence undeniable. One by one, they stepped forward, their voices a chorus of judgment. They spoke of honor, sacrifice, and the burden of power. Each word was a challenge, a question Kane had to answer, not with his voice but with his soul. He felt their scrutiny, their doubt, but he did not waver. "I'm not perfect," Kane said, his voice cutting through the cacophony. "I've made mistakes. I've lost people I cared about, but I've never stopped fighting for what matters. If that's not enough, then so be it." The figures paused, their gazes heavy with something Kane couldn't quite place. Then, slowly, they stepped back, fading into the darkness. The chamber began to shift again, the symbols on the walls glowing brighter, until they filled his vision. Kane braced himself, expecting another trial, but instead he felt a sudden calm. The armor's presence shifted, its once cold detachment replaced by something warmer, almost approving. Kane felt it settling around him, no longer testing but supporting. It had found what it was looking for. As the light faded and the chamber returned to its original state, Kane found himself alone again, though he didn't feel alone. The armor's voice resonated softly in his mind, not as a question, but as a declaration. "You are worthy." Kane exhaled, the weight of the trial finally lifting. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing with certainty. He hadn't just been chosen by the armor. He had earned it. And with that realization came a clarity of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Stepping out of the chamber, his team stared at him in awe. The glow of the armor was subdued now, but its power was unmistakable. Kane met their gazes, his voice steady as he spoke. "We're not done yet." The battlefield was chaos, a storm of fire and blood under a darkened sky. Alien warships hung above the colony world of Nova Prime, their shadows casting an ominous pall over the burning city below. Civilians screamed, scrambling for cover as enemy forces advanced. Humanity's defenses, already battered and spread thin, were crumbling under the relentless assault. Yet amidst the carnage, a figure emerged from the smoke, clad in armor that shimmered like liquid night. Captain Adrian Kane moved with precision, the armor amplifying his speed and strength far beyond human limits. The protector of Escharin had transformed him, and with it came an awareness that was both exhilarating and daunting. He could feel the battlefield, every movement, every shift in the enemy's formation. The armor wasn't just a weapon. It was a symphony of strategy and power, its guidance threading through his thoughts like an unspoken voice. He leapt over the wreckage of a toppled skyscraper, his landing cracking the ground beneath him. Ahead, an alien walker, a towering war machine bristling with plasma cannons, turned its attention to him. It loomed over the human soldiers who had been pinned down, its weapons charging for a devastating strike. "Fall back," Kane commanded, his voice amplified by the armor. The soldiers hesitated for only a moment before retreating, their trust in him absolute. The walker fired, a beam of searing energy lancing toward Kane. He didn't flinch. The armor reacted in a heartbeat, forming a shimmering barrier that absorbed the blast. Before the machine could recalibrate, Kane surged forward, his movements a blur. With a single strike, his armored fist tore through the walker's leg, sending it crashing to the ground. He climbed its chassis with inhuman agility, ripping through its defenses until he reached the core. With a final, decisive blow, the walker exploded in a blaze of fire and metal. Kane leapt clear, landing amidst the stunned soldiers. "Get the civilians to safety," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. As they obeyed, Kane turned his attention skyward. The alien warships remained a looming threat, their bombardment relentless. He could feel the armor urging him forward, its power surging within him, but even it had limits. He needed to be strategic. "Grayson," he called through the comms. The lieutenant's voice crackled in response. "We're holding the eastern perimeter, but it's not going to last. What's your status?" "I'm heading for the main command ship," Kane said, already sprinting toward the nearest anti-aircraft platform. Grayson hesitated. "That's suicide, sir." "It's necessity," Kane replied. The armor's power propelled him forward, each stride carrying him closer to the towering weapon. He reached the platform just as its crew was overwhelmed by alien infantry. Without breaking his pace, Kane tore through the enemy ranks, his strikes precise and devastating. The armor guided him, its movements fluid and instinctive. When the platform was secure, Kane activated its targeting systems, locking onto the alien command ship. The massive vessel hovered ominously above the city, its hull bristling with weapons. Kane knew the odds of bringing it down were slim, but he also knew that if he didn't try, Nova Prime would fall. The anti-aircraft cannons roared to life, their projectiles streaking toward the warship. Explosions rippled across its shields, but the ship remained intact. It retaliated with a devastating blast, obliterating the platform in an instant. Kane barely escaped, the armor's reflexes saving him from the fiery destruction. As he tumbled through the air, he focused on the ship, its defenses glowing with energy. The armor pulsed with an idea, a solution that was as dangerous as it was audacious. He landed on the outskirts of the city, his impact creating a small crater. Grayson's voice was frantic in his ear. "Captain, are you alive?" "Alive and improvising," Kane replied, his tone grim. He sprinted toward the nearest remaining dropship, commandeering it with ease. The pilot, a young man barely out of training, stared at him in awe. You're him, the one in the armor." "Fly," Kane said, his voice leaving no room for hesitation. The dropship ascended, weaving through enemy fire as it climbed toward the command ship. Kane stood at the open hatch, the wind whipping around him. The closer they got, the more oppressive the ship's presence became. It was a fortress in the sky, its hull brimming with weapons and alien soldiers. When they were close enough, Kane leapt from the dropship, landing with a deafening crash on the warship's surface. Alarms blared, and enemy forces swarmed toward him, but he was relentless. The armor guided his every move, turning him into a force of nature. Plasma bolts ricocheted off his shield as he fought his way toward the ship's core. The corridors were a maze, but the armor seemed to know the way. It was as though it could sense the ship's vital points, leading him unerringly toward its heart. When he reached the control chamber, he found himself face to face with the alien commander, a towering figure encased in its own form of battle armor. "You are not worthy of that relic," the alien growled, its voice resonating with disdain. Kane didn't waste words. He launched himself at the commander, their clash shaking the chamber. The alien was strong, its blows heavy and precise, but the armor gave Kane the edge. He moved faster, struck harder, and adapted quicker. The fight was brutal and unrelenting, but Kane's resolve never wavered. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for humanity. With a final, shattering strike, he brought the alien commander to its knees. The warship trembled as its systems began to fail. Kane accessed the ship's controls, overriding its systems with the armor's help. He directed it on a collision course with the enemy fleet, knowing the sacrifice it would require. As the ship began its descent, Kane activated his communicator. "Grayson, the command ship is falling. Finish the fight." "Understood," Grayson replied, his voice filled with both determination and sorrow. The armor pulsed, its energy wrapping around Kane as the ship plummeted. For the first time, he felt a strange peace. He had done what was necessary, but as the warship collided with the fleet, a blinding light enveloped him. The armor surged, its power protecting him in ways he hadn't expected. When the light faded, Kane found himself alive, standing amidst the wreckage. The battlefield was silent, the enemy fleet obliterated. Humanity had won a reprieve, and Kane had become more than a soldier. He was the protector of humanity,